Today was a pivotal day in the career of Mayor Tiffany Henyard, whose political empire appeared to be imploding in real time as cameras rolled in the tense courtroom. The beleaguered mayor was forced to leave the proceedings at what could only be called a political catastrophe. This was a public reckoning, not simply another ordinary trial. Henyard had long evaded the situation, but it was the weight of the mounting corruption accusations that finally caught up with her. The damning financial secrets were made public, or perhaps the realization that even her once loyal supporters were starting to turn against her. The moment had long been coming, and the courtroom was filled with anticipation as reporters, political analysts, and regular citizens sat there anticipating the moment of reckoning for Dalton's most controversial mayor. The judge entered the room, fell silent, and the proceedings started. Henyard, who had previously appeared confident and defiant, now appeared visibly shaken as a prosecutor presented indisputable proof of her shady dealings. The prosecutor cited instances of financial misconduct and abuse of authority, including a $43,000 Amazon shopping spree, first-class airfare, and lavish hotel stays that were all funded by public funds. Henyard sat there trying to keep her composure, but every new bit of evidence seemed to undermine her confidence. Whispers filled the room as fresh documentation tied Henyard directly to financial transactions that involved misused taxpayer funds. Even some of her most steadfast supporters were visibly unnerved. Her usual bravado was gone. Henyard, who had once dominated every room she entered, now appeared to shrink under the weight of the allegations. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, eyes darting around the room. It was clear she was contemplating an exit strategy, perhaps a hasty retreat from a courtroom, but before she could act, the prosecutor pressed on, making the case against her airtight. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense as Henyard's legal team scrambled to refute the mounting evidence. They claimed that the documents were taken out of context, that the case was a political attack against a strong woman in leadership, yet no one in the room seemed convinced. The judge's ruling echoed in the air, and reality of the situation began to sink in. Henyard's carefully cultivated image of political invincibility was quickly unraveling, but then came a moment that no one could have predicted. As the prosecutor wrapped up, the courtroom was rocked by an unexpected development. Henyard's trusted inner circle member and longtime ally stood forward. Once a loyal ally, this whistleblower revealed a culture of intimidation and terror in the mayor's administration, where anyone who dared to speak out against corruption and graft risked retaliation. The mayor's customary assurance was absent as a whistleblower proceeded, and Henyard's posture sagged, and she seemed to lose control of her emotions. Henyard's cheeks reddened as the truth about her abuse of power came into focus for the first time during the trial. As the truth about her reign came to light, it became evident that this was more than just a political scandal. Rather, it was the overthrow of a whole dictatorship founded on deceit, manipulation, and deception. The prosecution's attempt to control the narrative had failed, and the walls were closing as the courtroom fell into an eerie calm as the seriousness of the situation sank home. The prosecution had presented an unquestionable case of financial mismanagement, corruption, and abuse of power. The judge called for a brief break because Henyard's world was falling apart. in front of her. But when the proceedings resumed, Henyard, who was notorious for her controlling demeanor, was anything but calm. The mayor was clearly trembling with rage and frustration, and she stood up suddenly, her hands clenched, and she yelled at the judge, "This is all lies. You just can't handle it." As the courtroom exploded in commotion and reporters scrambled to capture the startling breakdown, security rushed to step in and tell Henyard to calm down. But Henyard's rage was uncontrollable, and she bounded out of the room with obvious rage. She clearly believed this was simply another obstacle to overcome. But as she got close to the door, federal officials who had been calmly observing the entire process suddenly barred her from leaving. For the first time during the trial, Henyard's defiant expression faltered as the room went silent. She was gently approached by a lead federal agent who handed her a document and said, "This is not an arrest, but we need you to come with us for additional interrogation." When she understood that this was something far more serious than simply another political altercation, she was twisted in amazement and her face began to show terror. As the gravity of the situation struck in, the courtroom went hushed in shock. Once powerful during Iron Fist's rule, the woman was now helpless and imprisoned by her own deeds. On Henyard, Dawn responded in a panic with an asterisk for defiance. This was the first time she had been surrounded. She was unable to negotiate her way out of the position as she stood in front of federal officials, her political strength having failed her. This is harassment and persecution. For political reasons? An asterisk. She spoke in a voice that echoed around the courtroom. "This is something you will all regret." To shield her from the agents, her legal team rushed to her side and moved in front of her. "We need to leave now, don't say anything," one of them said in a whisper, trying to diffuse the tension. Henyard had always believed she could talk her way out of anything. But this time there was no way out, and her defiance was clear. When the agent calmly but firmly replied, "We need you to come with us, Miss Henyard." Henyard realized she was in far more serious trouble than she had ever thought. This isn't yet an arrest. For the first time, her entire political career, which had been based on deceit, coercion, and manipulative tactics, was now crumbling down around her. She was no longer in charge. The situation had gotten out of hand. Her Henyards raced as she attempted to comprehend the truth of what was occurring. Clearly, it was the goal of the federal agents and a growing number of federal, state, and local investigative agencies to bring her to justice. She had no influence over the collapse, and even her closest colleagues seemed powerless to stop it. Once invincible, untouchable, Henyard's career was in jeopardy. She straightened her back, clenched her fists, and glared defiantly at the agents. But there was no question that this was the beginning of the end. Henyard's lawyers made a valiant effort to reassure her, but her disobedience only seemed to get stronger. "An asterisk. You can't do this to me," she screamed, emphasizing that she was not leaving. The crowd held its breath as the officials remained steadfast in their decision, their cool manner standing in stark contrast to the Henyard frenetic energy. The following chapter in the startling, as the scene played out in front of the public, the mayor who had once ruled Dalton with an iron fist was now at the mercy of the very system she had manipulated for so long. The drama in the courtroom was far from over, but one thing was certain. Tiffany Henyard's hold on power had been broken, and there was no going back to the federal investigation, which was just getting started. It became increasingly clear with each moment that Henyard's days in office and her freedom were coming to an end. As federal agents moved in to escort Mayor Tiffany Henyard from the courtroom, it became evident that her meticulously constructed image as an untouchable, powerful leader was collapsing in real time, and the people of Dalton, once dominated by the Henyard political machine, were now witnessing the slow, inevitable unraveling of a mayor who had taken too much and given too little. Henyard had been the face of Dalton's leadership for years, but the fallout from this court drama was only just getting started. The courtroom was teeming with reporters who sensed that this was the moment when everything changed. The world watched as Henyard faced the repercussions of her conduct for the first time in her career, as cameras rolled, documenting every moment of her downfall as social media exploded in a frenzy and phones went up. The mayor was visibly shaken, with fire burning in her eyes. Her lawyers tugged at her sleeve in an attempt to calm her and move her along, but the mayor was visibly shaken. She gritted her teeth and rushed forward, determined to break free from a situation. As the minutes passed, many others quietly began to pull away, disillusioned by the spectacle unfolding before them. Henyard, who had once been the symbol of invincibility, now looked more like a liability than a leader. When a former insider, a dependable member of the Henyard administration, took the stand and turned on her, the whistleblowers, the already tense courtroom setting, took on a whole new dimension. She stormed through the courtroom doors with federal agents on either side of her, and the trek to the courthouse hallways was a humiliating experience. Every move she made was captured on camera, allowing the world to witness the once powerful mayor's decline. Disclosures point to a toxic. As her lawyers talked hurriedly to her, Henyard abruptly got up from her seat, clutching the edge of the table. Her nervousness was palpable. Reporters rushed to record the moment when Henyard, who often steers the narrative, lost it entirely in an explosive fashion because of the high level of tension in the room. The charges, which described a government based on coercion, corruption, and intimidation against anyone who tried to speak out, were scathing. As the walls she had once believed to be impregnable began to slowly close, her face froze in amazement and rage. The fact that she was no longer in charge of the story was all around her. An angry asterisk was her cry. This is all untrue, and you just can't stand it. As her voice echoed off the walls and the jurors looked at each other, the prosecution stood stoically with their arms folded, watching her break down with a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Although security personnel acted quickly to defuse the situation, Henyard wasn't finished yet. You guys will repent this. I'm not going down as you believe. With each phrase, the drama grew more intense. As Henyard turned the storm out of the courtroom, the once dominant mayor, who had power over every room she entered, was suddenly encircled by the federal agents and stuck in place. But as she arrived at the door, federal officials who had been calmly observing the whole event prevented her from leaving. Even the most ardent supporters were silenced. For the first time during this whole circus, the appearance of the agents carrying official paperwork suggested that Henyard's world was on the verge of disintegrating, but the judge's preliminary verdict was still pending. In a frantic whisper, her lawyers attempted to shield her from the agent's right ones, saying, "Hurry, we need to leave, don't say anything." "This is political persecution," Henyard shouted, her voice resonating throughout the now still courtroom as she squared her shoulders and clenched her fist, gazing furiously at the lead agent. But the agents remained unconvinced. "We need you to come along so we can ask you more questions," Henyard. Her accusations of political prejudice did not deter the federal agents, and it became brutally clear that her power had been stripped away and that the humiliation was becoming unbearable. Henyard's belligerent look faltered as the true seriousness of the situation sank in her attempt to control the narrative, to distort the facts in her favor. The agent calmly stated, and the knowledge hit him like a wave. Henyard's entire character, built on manipulation and control, was falling apart. The federal officer's unrelenting authority contrasted sharply with her formerly untouchable status. Even though the judge had not yet made a final ruling, the presence of federal authorities at the courthouse suggested that the matter had progressed to a far more severe level. Henyard was in front of federal officials who were obstructing her progress with their paperwork in hand, despite her sources telling her that nothing would come of ongoing investigations and that she was secure. Joe became alarmed by the focus on the word asterisk because things had gotten out of control. Reporters, already in a frenzy, recorded every minute that phones were raised, cameras flashed, and social media exploded with hashtags and commentary. Asterisk, asterisk, Bora, asterisk. Asterisk and asterisk skills were already filling timelines as Henyard's crisis played out in front of millions of people. Her once ardent fans were stunned into silence as her confidence started to falter, indicating that the tide had clearly turned. With clenched teeth and fire in her eyes, the untouchable mayor now appeared to be a woman on the verge of losing everything. Henyard pushed through the courthouse doors, and despite her lawyer's attempts to help her by tugging at her sleeve, she remained resolute. The woman who once dominated Dalton with her powerful presence now found herself completely vulnerable, her every weakness laid bare for the world to see. The finality of the moment was impossible to ignore. Henyard's long-held belief that she was untouchable had proven false, and the federal agent's calm unwaveringness had sealed her fate. The walk to the courthouse hallways was nothing short of humiliating, with cameras, reporters, and flashing lights following her every move and documenting every anxious twitch of her face and every step that brought her close. Once enthralled by her leadership, the people now watched in real time as her downfall was televised, a display of political failure and scandalous humiliation. As if it were a Hollywood drama, the media went into overdrive and presented Tiffany Henyard's decline from stardom. Reporters outside the courthouse seemed to echo her refusal as they shouted questions at her incessantly. Have you got a statement to make? Tiffany, are you going to step down? Do you have a case against you with the FBI? The hen twitched her face, clearly annoyed. She knew better than to offer reporters additional sound bites, so she resisted the impulse to speak up, even if her once perfect posture slipped. As she entered a federal building full with federal officers, rather, she remained mute and focused inward on managing the growing situation that was becoming unmanageable. Now that she was losing the narrative of her invincibility, her staff was working feverishly behind the scenes to change the facts to her advantage. It was all part of a political plot to quiet a powerful leader who had the audacity to challenge the system. According to a statement that went viral online. But as the probe went on, the leaks painted a more somber picture of Henyard, who was being investigated for financial mismanagement, intimidation, and even secret offshore accounts, in addition to the well-known charges of corruption. The situation grew more horrific as the detectives investigated deeper. Her long-held conviction that she was untouchable had been shown to be false, and her fate was sealed by the federal agent's unflinching composure. Previously mesmerized by her leadership, the audience now watched in real time as her downfall was shown on television. The scene of Tiffany Henyard's demise was portrayed by the media as though it were a Hollywood movie, and they went into overdrive. Reporters outside the courthouse seemed to echo her refusal as they shouted questions at her incessantly. "Tiffany, do you have a statement? Are you going to resign? Does the FBI really have your back?" Henyard's once perfect poise faltered as she walked inside a federal building full with federal officials, her face twitching with evident irritation. She knew better than to offer reporters additional sound bites, so she fought the impulse to participate despite the continual onslaught. Rather, she kept quiet, focusing inward on controlling the escalating catastrophe that was getting out of hand. Her crew was working feverishly behind the scenes to change the narrative to her advantage as she began to lose control of the narrative of invincibility. Despite online assertions that the disclosures were all part of a political wit hunt and a coordinated attempt to discredit a prominent leader who had dared to question the system. The leaks depicted an increasingly gloomy image as the investigation went on. The video went viral in a matter of minutes, and parodies linking her to well-known corrupt politicians were all over social media, along with hashtags like Tiffany Henyard, Expose, and Justice for City. In addition to the well-known charges of corruption, Henyard was also being investigated for alleged financial mismanagement, intimidation, and even covert offshore accounts. The situation deteriorated as the detectives dug deeper. Her crew was frightened and desperately attempting to determine how to fix the damage. Her public relations staff spent time promoting claims of innocence, and her lawyers rushed to reject the tape, claiming it was edited, but it was too late, and the harm had already done. In an attempt to gauge the situation, one senator said, "If these accusations are true, we expect full accountability." Influencers, local politicians, her biggest supporters, and even some of her closest allies began to turn away from her. Even TV networks that had previously supported her began to shift to prime time. An overview of the anchor. The best thing is that there may not be a way out this time because Tiffany Henyard's walls are closing. It was obvious to all that things were going out of control. The pressure of corruption charges, intimidation, and the public's growing discontent with her leadership had turned her once dominant, self-assured image into a desperate, cornered politician. Her meticulously constructed image was quickly disintegrating, and it was becoming painfully obvious that the political career she had put so much effort into was now in jeopardy. Tiffany Henyard sat across from a team of federal agents in an interrogation room, attempting to keep up her normal demeanor, but the cracks were starting to show. She sneered and forced a laugh as she sat back in her chair, realizing how deep the hole she had dug herself into was. Unfazed, the lead investigator carefully set a thick folder containing proof of her alleged misconduct on the table. A distressing picture of a politician who had misused her position for personal benefit was painted by the communications, wire transfers, and bank statements. A large deposit from an unidentified shell business associated with a government contract was revealed when the investigator opened the folder, flipped through the pages, and slid one in her direction. The email exchange that described how she had performed favors for specific donors in return for political support was the last piece of evidence that hit her like a kick to the belly. Henyard turned to another page, his smile faltering. Henyard had not come back for the first time in a long time. The world had begun to move on without her, and there was a spooky silence in the room. The city's citizens were eagerly anticipating the next phase of this developing story. Reporters were preparing for their nightly broadcast, and social media was ablaze with speculation about her successor. As he talked, the investigator leaned closer and said, "You can start talking right now, or you can continue pretending. We have enough to take this all the way." After years of using words to get out of tough situations, Tiffany was suddenly sitting rigidly in her chair, her paint nails tapping against the cold metal table, her arms crossed. But this time, instead of a fierce political opponent or smear campaign, she was dealing with real repercussions. The main detective shook his head and went on. As he turned the pages of the huge file, he discovered more damning material, such as emails describing backdoor transactions and deposits into offshore accounts for fictitious community initiatives. "We have dealt with politicians like you before, Miss Henyard, and they all think they are untouchable until they aren't." A sworn statement from a former aide who had attended significant meetings and decided to come forward was passed across the table by the investigator, who arched an eyebrow. Tiffany made an effort to grin, but it fell short of her eyes. Tiffany's breath stuck in her throat for the first time. The panic attack was now fear rather than annoyance or rage. The fallout from Henyard's interrogation began almost immediately, and she glanced toward the door, half expecting her lawyers to rush in and save her, but they were nowhere to be seen. The walls were closing in. After the political world was horrified by the revelation of the federal probe, analysts speculated about the depth of her alleged misconduct. Some projected that Henyard may spend a considerable amount of time in jail if the charges were proven to be genuine, while others likened her demise to other well-known political scandals. Calls for a forensic investigation and, if required, her removal from office were made apparent, and a special emergency session was called, broadcast live to the public. The woman who had once been one of the city's most influential characters was now being publicly abandoned, and it was a breathtaking moment. Quick action was taken by the city council, which had previously backed her. A trustee said, "We can no longer stand by while taxpayer money is squandered. We are calling for an immediate investigation." Her team rushed to control the damage by releasing a carefully crafted video statement that included the standard talking points Tiffany Henyard had previously used to shift blame and rally support in a last-ditch attempt to preserve what little of her public image remained. However, the public's response was a quick and violent protest erupted outside. People were shouting for justice and holding signs outside City Hall. Some called for her to be arrested immediately. Tiffany's meticulously constructed image as an invincible leader was crumbling before her very eyes. No matter how hard she tried to spin the tale, she was losing followers every day, and even the media was beginning to criticize her. She continued to make forceful public pronouncements, strongly disputing the growing accusations against her, making it clear that her time at the top was coming to an end. Despite her assurances that "I've devoted my life to serving the city, the truth will come out, and I will not be intimidated," the internet did not tolerate her refutations. Social internet exploded with criticism, calling her a thief and a liar. Where is the fake news now? that you have so much money. You're done. Just give up once we have witnesses, recordings, and documentation. Just one post. Tiffany chose to face the charges head-on by calling a press conference rather than backing down. Speaking in heated, rebellious tones, she accused the media, her political adversaries, and the federal government of targeting her in an attempt to silence her for breaking their rules. With every statement, her ire grew, but the reporters continued to press her about how the bank data had gotten out. Miss Henyard, do you dispute the tapes in which you threaten your opponents? If someone were coming out against you as a whistleblower, how would you respond? Tiffany skillfully sidestepped their inquiries, restating her allegations of persecution, but the narrative had already shifted against her. The unimaginable happened late that night. After most media outlets had wrapped up their coverage, the FBI, with state officials' help, executed a search warrant at Henyard's residence and workplace. It was the first time federal investigators had ever investigated a sitting mayor's residence in the city's history, making it a momentous occasion. As officials removed laptops, hard drives, and boxes of records from her home, journalists rushed to the scene. Then came the photo that would later come to symbolize her precipitous decline in popularity. What started as an investigation and a series of accusations quickly escalated into a severe criminal case after the picture of Tiffany Henyard in custody went viral. The charges included serious wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit bribes, all of which carried severe jail sentences. On news programs, legal experts talked about how severe the charges are. A guilty Henyard may face over 20 years in prison, according to one expert, and a plea agreement now seemed to be her only option. The city held its breath as the world spun quickly, with fresh stories emerging with each cycle. Henyard's once supporting political friends have suddenly turned on him by issuing statements calling for justice and accountability. Investigators revealed that they were also investigating a number of officials who had ties to Tiffany. There was chaos in the city. Some were astonished, some were happy that she had fallen, and some had been waiting for this day for a long time and had seen it coming. It was unclear whether this was a final act of rebellion or merely a phony threat. But one thing was clear: Tiffany Henyard's reign was coming to an end. However, her story was far from overthrowing her lawyers. She sent one final message from behind bars: "This is not the truth. The truth will be revealed." In a holding cell, Tiffany sat by herself, gazing at the icy grey walls of the empire she had created, which was crumbling all around her. History will remember how she went from being a well-known political person to a disgraced criminal. A story of power abuse, dishonesty, and corruption reached a new level, yet many doubts remained. Was there another side to the tale that the public was unaware of? Or did she truly deserve this downfall? Imagine what was happening behind closed doors that we haven't even heard about yet. If the scanner was developing in the open, would the public's interest in Tiffany Henyard's demise only increase if this were the case? But one thing was for sure: sincere politicians always find a way back, even if it appeared like her fate was set. The world would wait and observe. For the time being, aware that Tiffany Henyard's tale was far from finished,